Retired general gets on CNN to discuss the implications of the fall of Bakhmut to the Russian army. Now, before we watch, there's a few things that I want to share with you about Bakhmut, the region it's in, and the territory that Russia and Ukraine have carved out within that region. What's highlighted is the Donetsk region of Ukraine. Ukraine has many regions, just like how the United States has many states. In the Donetsk region is where many of the battles are taking place between Russia and Ukraine. And in the Donetsk region is where Bakhmut is located. Now let's get to some facts about this region. Oblast means region. That was what we had highlighted. In the Donetsk region, there are 52 cities. Donetsk is the name of both the region and the largest city. Donetsk, the city, has already been taken, but in the past, when people would mention Donetsk, you had to differentiate between whether you're talking about the region as a whole or the city. Donetsk as a region produces more than 50% of Ukraine's coal, steel, cast iron. There's a lot of raw earth, minerals and materials. There are also many mines and factories and warehouses. If this were Civilization 6, this would be a tile with a lot of production gear signs, okay? +3, 4, +5 production. It's a very important area. There's a lot of resources. And not only do you have resources like coal or steel, you have fertile black earth. So there's a lot of agriculture that's done in this region. Ukraine, like Russia, produces much of the world's wheat, grain. A lot of that comes from this area, fertile black earth. Like Ukraine has basically always been described as Europe's breadbasket. So the Donetsk region is where a lot of that bread comes from. This is a very valuable region. There's a lot of economic output from this region. Finally, Bakhmut is the 8th largest city in the Donetsk Oblast. What you guys are seeing here, you have the Russian cities highlighted in red, and then the cities that are under Ukrainian control, obviously in Ukrainian colors. And then on the right, I have their population sizes. I have them listed in order of population size. Okay, so Donetsk city, which is the largest city in the Donetsk region, they have a population of 980,000, nearly 1 million people, right? That's at the top. And then number 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 10. You have Donetsk, Mariupol, Makivka, and Horlivka. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian. 4 of the top 10 cities in the Donetsk region are under Russian control. When you think about capturing a region, its resources, this is a big deal. And then they have Yenakiv, and they recently took Bakhmut. So Bakhmut is the 8th largest city. Bakhmut also has a lot of mines and warehouses. And as Zelensky has mentioned, Bakhmut is important because it serves as what he describes a road right into the west that allows the Russians to push into the west. There's a train station here. There's a lot of different routes. So there's just a lot of value. Bakhmut is important. It's not the most important, but it was important enough to serve as one of the largest, possibly even the most strategic battle of this war. That's why 55,000 Ukrainians died defending it. And of course, this is a number that we're not really sure about, but the point is a lot of men died defending it. A lot of Russians died taking it. There were so many shells dropped on this city. This is, I think they described the biggest battle in the last century, ever since World War II. So this is a massive battle. It just gives you a sense of how important this battle was, how important Bakhmut was. Let's just assume that they had their pre-war population figures. Because the Russians control 6 of the 10, that amounts to 2.2 million people under Russian control in that region, compared to the 4 out of the 10 Ukrainians still hold on to pre-war figures, 424,000. So there's a huge discrepancy between the two. So you can see the Russians are not only gaining ground, but they're taking Donetsk. And this is why Zelensky was saying Bakhmut is so important, because it doesn't just allow them to keep moving west. It allows them city by city, one by one, to solidify control over Donetsk. So now you have an idea of what the Donetsk region is like and how many cities the Russians have taken in this region. So with this context, let's now listen to what CNN and the general have to say about Bakhmut.
I turn to retired Army 4-star General Wesley Clark for insight. In addition to being a CNN military analyst, he's also a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Do you think Russia's made a mistake focusing so much of its forces on Bakhmut? I mean, not only the Wagner Group, but Russia's main army as well.
Pay attention to how Anderson Cooper frames the question. This is called an opinion-leading question. An opinion-leading question is a type of question that pushes respondents to answer in a specific manner based on the way they're framed. More than often, these questions already contain information that the survey creator or the person asking the question wants to confirm rather than try to get a true and unbiased answer to that question. Here's an example of how an opinion-leading question works. Do you see the broken glass? It implies that there was broken glass, and therefore the witness is more likely to say yes. So when he asks, do you think it's a mistake that Russia focused so many of its troops there, he's implying that it was a mistake for the Russians to put so many troops there. Now, Anderson Cooper has a retired general on the show. He hasn't even heard from him yet to be able to frame the question in such a way. And we know he's not a military expert. He's a journalist. So how could he frame the question to begin with in that way? But of course, Anderson Cooper is a paid actor. He doesn't come up with the questions. He reads off the teleprompter and he asks questions prepared for him by the editors and producers of the for-profit media company that propagates the interests of the country that it operates in, aka the United States. Now don't worry, I'm not suggesting that this is a uniquely American thing to do. We know that Russia today would do and does do the exact same thing. But I just wanted to point out that the propaganda begins with the moment they ask the question. Another aspect of this question is funny to me. Russia focused so many of its troops there. That's what Anderson Cooper is trying to get at. Well, Ukraine did the same thing. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a battle that took 9 months to complete. So couldn't he have asked, was it a mistake for Ukraine to focus so many of its troops to defend Bakhmut? Especially considering that 55,000 Ukrainian soldiers have reportedly died defending Bakhmut. But he chooses instead to frame the question as Russia making a mistake. Now let's hear what the general has to say.
Well, it certainly seems to me like a mistake. We may never know why they did it, but it seems that it's become a symbolic objective. And the Russian High Command has obviously told its generals, take Bakhmut, don't care what it costs, just get it. And so they've thrown countless assaults in there. They've taken a lot of losses. And now they're vulnerable to being actually encircled by the Ukrainians. And this would be a huge symbolic defeat for Russia. It might open the way to a surprise offensive that goes right through Bakhmut by the Ukrainians at the heart of the Russian positions.
Okay, he says, seems like a mistake to me. Well, that's fair. He's entitled to his opinion, and who knows, one day in the future, in hindsight, we may be informed that it actually was a mistake. The next part of his reply, there's a problem.
We may never know why they did it, but it seems that it's become a symbolic objective.
This is absolutely ridiculous. He's a general. He knows exactly why they did it. We already reviewed the facts. Bakhmut is the 8th largest city in Donetsk. It has many roads and railways. It allows the Russians to keep pushing west. There are factories and mines in and around the city. We know that Russia is trying to take and solidify their control over the Donetsk region. And of course, we know what President Zelensky had to say about the importance of defending Bakhmut, which he described as being a tactical location. So we know exactly why they did it. It's a small but important part of a plan to gut Ukraine economically and landlock it. This is the territory they currently take. Based on this objective, this is what they're looking to do next. I don't know when, maybe the next 6 months, maybe the next year and a half, but this is their objective. You can see that they're trying to landlock Ukraine, that they're going to try and take the rest of the south. So that means taking cities like Odessa, that means taking these other regions. Once you do this to Ukraine, you landlock it. And like I said, with the Donetsk region, you have a lot of agricultural output, you have a lot of minerals and resources. You severely cripple Ukraine's GDP and their economic output. This idea that it's a symbolic victory and not actually a tactical victory or a meaningful real-world victory is ludicrous. And then he goes on to say that they will surround the Russians in Bakhmut. Well, this was 13 days ago, and there is still no surrounding of Bakhmut. Now, they might try to do it with a counteroffensive, I don't know. When he says the Ukrainians might go right through Bakhmut, it took Russia 9 months to do just that, to go through Bakhmut. And that was with their advantage of artillery, air support, air defense, glide bombs, tanks, armored vehicles, freshly trained troops. So this idea that Ukraine is just going to go right back through Bakhmut in no time with their counteroffensive, given that they're outgunned, doesn't make sense. How on earth are they supposed to march right back in and go right through it without more troops and more weapons? Yes, the West is helping them, but that help is trickling in little by little. It isn't enough to do what he's describing. Not enough to surround Bakhmut. It's not enough to go through Bakhmut. Another interesting aspect is how he keeps using the word symbolic. What is a symbol? A symbol is something that represents something else. It isn't the thing itself. A symbolic victory isn't really a victory. It's a representation of it. So why does he keep using this word? Symbolic victory for Ukraine, symbolic defeat for Russia. Because it's his way of saying that the Ukrainians can't actually defeat Russia, but they can achieve something that represents a defeat of Russia. This is essentially saying that they can achieve political victories on the battlefield instead of actual tactical victories that give them success over Russia in the long term. So basically, he's talking about a temporary victory that they can celebrate as a political victory and show everyone, hey, look, we're winning. But they're not actually winning. I made a video about this recently, talking about how Robert E. Lee was seeking a political victory with his counteroffensive in Pennsylvania and how Ukraine may be going for the same thing. You can click here to watch that.
What do you think a Ukrainian offensive will hope to accomplish?
All right, this time we have a good question from Anderson Cooper.
Ideally, the Ukrainians are going to get an offensive going in the south toward Crimea. Ideally, the Ukrainians are going to get an offensive going in the south toward Crimea. But we have to be prepared to be surprised. There's going to be more than one axis of attack. There may be one in the north, one in the east toward Bakhmut or Donetsk, and then one in the south, perhaps Melitopol, or maybe they'll go across the Dnieper.
Okay, and now we have another ridiculous quote by the general. He says, ideally they want to go towards Crimea. Okay, I'm not saying that this is impossible. Technically, anything is possible, but I want to show you a map of Crimea and explain why I think this is a ridiculous expectation of the Ukrainians. No offense to the Ukrainians. They are brave soldiers, but they are outgunned. Everyone on Earth, with the exception of the US, NATO, and China, would be outgunned if facing the Russians. The Russians were a superpower, and they are still a major power. They have one of the largest, if not the largest, militaries on Earth. Okay, so it's not disrespectful to describe the Ukrainians as being outgunned. It's also not unrealistic to say so. So Ukraine doesn't have the firepower it needs to overwhelm powerful defenses and obstacles that stand in the way of Crimea. So first things first, let's take a look at where the Ukrainian army is. They're on the other side of this river. So it's the Ukrainian army, the river, the Russian army, which is supported by air defense, artillery, the Air Force, armored vehicles, etc. Whatever supplies Ukraine has, Russia has more. I don't know how much more, but it's a lot more, okay? They're a major power. They have a lot more production capacity, and they have a bigger military. Ukraine would have to cross the river under fire in order to get into the territory before they even reach the gates to Crimea. That by itself is incredibly difficult. They would lose a lot of men and a lot of equipment trying that. Even if they get across, look how narrow the gap into Crimea becomes. Narrow gaps are the best parts to defend because it means the enemy has less land to work with. You know how in the movie 300, where 300 Spartans took on 1 million Persians? Well, that was because they were defending a narrow gap. Narrow gaps are very friendly to the defender. Now, the Ukrainians don't have 1 million men like in this movie. They also don't have endless supplies of equipment or firepower. Moreover, this area is wet. There are marshes. So even if they get across the river, go to this narrow gap, they have to cross another wetland. It's like crossing another river under fire. It's incredibly difficult. Plus, the Russians nearby have dug a massive 70-kilometer trench. What does that mean? It means that there's even less land to work with. The narrow gap is already narrow, and then they add a trench, a long trench. The Ukrainians would find themselves trying to snake through the area in order to get to the gates of Crimea. It's a maze perfectly designed by the defenders. And then, of course, even if they get past all that, there are encampments and fortifications to deal with, plus Russian soldiers, plus artillery, plus the air superiority. This is literally the most difficult place for Ukraine to try and take. Okay, it wouldn't be outrageous to suggest that it would be difficult for NATO to take. So imagine Ukraine trying to take it. So it's ridiculous, in my opinion, for them to suggest that for Ukraine. But who knows? Anything is possible. Let's see how it plays out. So that's my response and my reaction to this retired general. If you're interested in cutting through the propaganda, stay right here with us and subscribe. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Trust nothing.